Gentlemen, I'd ask you to introduce yourself, if you will, please, and then I'll present questions to you after your opening statement.
Good evening, and certainly thanks for the invitation here this evening. It's a real privilege to address the voters here in Wyandotte County. My name is Greg Good. I'm a retired lieutenant colonel from the United States Army, and I decided to run in the 3rd District to give the voters a choice. The voters have not had a choice since 2010. The Republicans deserve a choice. The current establishment, the current political system seems to be dominated by career politicians. I'm not a career politician, and I don't intend to be a career politician. This political class has spent us into a debt of over $19 trillion. And I think that the Republicans owe it to our nation to get leaders in there who do not represent the political class, but represent the voters. And how do you do that? You stay away from political action committee money, you stay away from special interest, and you get in touch with the voters. I started my campaign on the 6th of May, walking door to door in Wyandotte County, and I'm still walking door to door talking to voters every single day. And I intend to give the Republican voters in the 3rd District a representative in Washington, D.C., and I certainly would expect the voters to engage with me on that journey and vote for me on August the 2nd. Thank you very much.
Mr. McLaughlin,
Good evening. I am Nathaniel McLaughlin, a Democratic candidate for Kansas 3rd District Congressional position. My thanks to the organizers of this forum for the opportunity to share my political vision to ensure that America remains second to no other nation in gross national output, education, health, or defense. If elected to the United States House of Representatives, I will not automatically be an adversary to those on the opposite aisle, because no one party is always right nor always wrong. However, I will never bend on my principles, recognizing that sometimes compromise is appropriate. On the issue of gun control, if elected to Congress, I will utilize the Supreme Court decision in Heller versus the District of Columbia, where the Supreme Court has already ruled in 2006 that the Second Amendment does not give unlimited rights to carry firearms. And I will use that court decision to take these military-style weapons off the street. If I'm elected to the House of Representatives, clean energy will be a focus, because clean energy and sustainability will ensure a healthy, not only country, but a healthy population. I favor retaining the Affordable Health Care Act. However, if elected, I would advocate for the establishment of a commission to ascertain the effects that legislation has had on small business owners, and where appropriate, make changes to that legislation, because the district that I would represent has many, many small business owners. And lastly, as a regional executive for the past 36 years, I will use my business acumen to bring to the table, because small business owners in America will be facing 3 issues in 2017: overtime, minimum wage, and work comp changes. Thank you.
Mr. Good, I'll present this question to you first, sir. What are 2 foundational principles you hold that you absolutely will not compromise on?
You know, I think that I think there's room for compromise on a lot of issues. 2 which I don't think absolutely deserve compromise. I think that would be, I would be hard pressed to identify 2, because I think that there are so many different ways that you can look at an issue. And quite frankly, a lot of things I don't know. But let me just throw one out there, and that is the insane spending. we have got to stop the insane spending. How do you do that? Well, that principle has been set. We passed a Budget Act well over 10 years ago. We break that Budget Act every single year. Now, why do we do that? I don't know. But if we can't follow the laws that we set for ourselves, we've got issues. So I would not be willing to bend on that particular principle. The second principle is it would have to be pro-life. I will not bend on pro-life. I think that that is it's not a social issue, it is a life issue. And when I say I won't bend on pro-life, I'm not just talking about abortion. Right now, we have an elderly population that continues to grow. And when these people are approaching their end of life and they're being sent to nursing homes and they start getting care, dementia sets in, and then we have a real challenge there. And I'll say a challenge, and I will demonstrate this with a story that was relayed to me. And a young lady, she's a nurse practitioner in a nursing home. And she says, Greg, don't you dare think that pro-life is just on one end. I work with elderly people every day. And she says pain medication that they're giving elderly folks. And dementia, they really can't tell you what their feelings of pain are, or they can't really remember. I don't really know how or what they're feeling, neither does anybody else. Now, she says what's happening is these elderly folks are being drugged. And then as they move on, in the end, their tolerance goes up towards the drug. They can't control them. They can't do other things. So what happens? In her opinion, she says she thinks that it's actually killing them. So she says, don't you dare just think that abortion is on one end. This pro-life issue is the entire spectrum, ladies and gentlemen. And we have got to say, you know, we are pro-life, and let's stick with pro-life the entire gamut. I won't budge on pro-life.
Thank you, Mr. Good. Mr. McLaughlin, same question to you. What two foundational principles do you hold?
I will share two, but I will slip into about three too, if that's okay, sir. The first one is federalism, whereby the federal government only does those things that the Constitution gives it authority to do and leaves other things to the states. But the most important one that I would not bend on is fair and equal access to the voting booth, to ensure that every citizen, regardless of color or sex, has the protection of civil liberties in this country. But without a strong national defense and national security, all of these other things that I wouldn't bend on would be a mute discussion. So I would not bend on any program that will make America second to anyone from a military standpoint or national security. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Mr. McLaughlin, we'll continue with you. Immigration is obviously an ongoing issue, particularly on the federal level. Many immigrants have found work in our area, in our county.
Yes.
And they're an important part of our workforce. What can be done, what would you want to see done to secure our borders while encouraging those here legally to find some sort of permanent status?
Well, I am a proponent of securing our borders, because without that, national security, again, and as I mentioned earlier, is a mute issue. But one thing I was taught in civics class, that America is one big melting pot, made up of a country of immigrants. If we take Native Americans, who I respect highly, out of the equation. But I believe that undocumented immigrants in this country should have a fair path to citizenship. I would not be talking about building a wall or breaking up families.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Good, same question, please, sir.
Well, certainly immigration is a component of national security. Until you have national security, you can't have a controlled immigration policy. So I spent 2 years on the east-west German border. We had a fence. And this country guarded that border for 50 years. For 50 years, we controlled our border overseas. Now, to think that we cannot control this border, to think that Congress cannot exercise the power of the purse to control this border, and we still get immigration policies that are contrary to the laws enacted by Congress because we do not use the power of the purse to control those executive actions. It's an absolute hypocrisy to see our immigration laws being totally disregarded. Now, until we start with border security, how can you actually enforce any immigration law? And to think that we want to bring other people from other countries with separate programs based on their needs in their countries, and we talk refugee status and the like, the water gets even muddier. And until we have control of the borders, national security, then we're not going to be able to enforce immigration, and then all the immigrants are going to be at risk.
Thank you, sir. Mr. McLaughlin, I'll address this to you first. In light of the Dallas events over this last weekend and such, and other events across U.S. cities, what's one specific thing on the federal government level would you want to see done that would promote healing in our country, while at the same time it would also support local law enforcement agencies or federal law enforcement agencies?
First, at the national level, the rhetoric and the race baiting that we see done by some who would seek the highest office in the land, until we remove some of that dialogue from the evening news and CNN, until we eliminate some of the race baiting and conservative stuff that you get on AM and AM radio, as a federal official, the duties of the House of Representatives, if I'm elected to, first and foremost, as established by the Constitution, is to deal with fiscal policies of this country. And going back to my earlier statement, community policing and state policing is a duty that the Constitution leaves and tells the federal government that's a state responsibility. But as a federal elected official, I would see if there are programs that could be developed where the federal government could encourage communities to begin to talk to each other. I know here in my hometown of Kansas City, Kansas, I'm very privileged to call one of my best friends, and I won't call a name because I don't want to politicize anybody, but as assistant police chief of Kansas City, Kansas, I know he gets up every day, he puts on his uniform with pride. When a firefighter grabs that uniform, they're putting their lives at risk each and every day. But we need straight talk from our leaders, because these professions do put their lives on the line every day. But when you have a 4-year-old child for the rest of their life have to recall the horrors that they went through, and seeing their stepfather-to-be killed, and then they sit there with mama at night and look at CNN and see a person who wants to hold the highest office spread racial hatred, we got a long way to go.
Mr. McLaughlin, a follow-up question to that. You mentioned possible federal programs. What would be a couple of components of a federal program that might be offered?
The Guantanamo, the FBI is the most highly trained police organization in this country. From weapons to psychological programs to physical training, to make, if we could send our military experts overseas to train some third world country on how to fight, we certainly ought to be able to send our police enforcement experts out of Virginia from the FBI office to help train and make resources available to our local police departments. But again, we have to be careful there because the Constitution is very straightforward about what the federal government does and does not do. One of the questionnaires that I answered for the state of Kansas was just what did I think about federalism when those two things come together.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Mr. Good, same question. In light of the Dallas events, what specific thing can the federal government do to bring healing and also be supportive of law enforcement agencies?
Well, obviously, the answer to the first question, promote healing, I mean, this was a horrific event, along with several other ones. And we need to treat these people like they are members of the community. It is a loss. It is not a policy discussion. It is not a discussion about Second Amendment rights. It is a loss that fathers, sons, mothers, entire families, entire communities need to deal with. And how do we deal with that? Well, we deal with that as communities, and we've seen it. The community leaders in Dallas have stood up, and they've done that. And I was totally impressed with the way they handled that entire situation to promote healing. That's the first thing you've got to do, and I think that's going extremely, extremely well. At the federal level, I will tell you that I am very, very concerned about the overreach of the federal government. When we created Department of Homeland Security, when we created these other agencies to go out there and do things, we created a military-style force. That is very threatening to a lot of our citizens. It's threatening to a lot of folks who are not out there in harm's way. When they see this military-style equipment, that is worrisome. I don't think that helps it. So getting back to community policing, where we've seen some examples of that in the last couple of days throughout the news. You don't see guys running around presenting themselves as a military force. You see them actually engaged in the community. But I think we need to do two other things that are beyond these two realms with regards to law enforcement. And the first thing that jumps out at you is mental health. And we've seen it right here in the state of Kansas. You know, when we started shutting down these mental hospitals, and we created prisons to house our mentally ill people. And we created a huge homeless problem. These people need help. We cut that out, and we need to go back and fix that. The second aspect of this is understanding that if you are going to have the appreciation for other cultures throughout our country, we have a Judeo-Christian value-based country, despite what other peoples may tell you. And I'll tell you, your laws are based on Judeo-Christian values. The fact of the matter is, when Thomas Aquinas and Thomas More were arguing with the king in England in 1451, and they discussed natural law, they discussed the other types of law, and I'm sure the judge over here could give you a lot more on it than what I did. We just can't shove that to the side and say, okay, this is not a Christian country. This is not all those Judeo-Christian values that we had, and when we threw out the Ten Commandments, when we threw out the Bibles out of school, what do these kids have to hold on to that says, thou shalt not kill, and feel guilty because they do? I don't know how you get that back into the community without doing something at the national level that says, you know what? We don't have to be ashamed of our Judeo-Christian values that this country was built on. And if you want to be an immigrant to this country, subscribe to this culture. Don't try to bring a culture in here that doesn't respect our values and doesn't respect how we get along as a nation, as we just heard, this melting pot of ours that we are very, very proud of. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Monterey, I need to ask how much more time we have so I can determine which questions to ask.
Go ahead. Go ahead. We've got at least 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Very good. Thank you very much. Mr. Good, we'll continue with you, sir. What changes in trade policy need to occur to allow, on the federal level, obviously, American businesses to be competitive in a global economy?
Well, I think one thing we don't need to do is give up our sovereignty, and we've all heard about TPP that's coming. We've heard several candidates get out there and say, okay, this trade partnership agreement with the Pacific, it's going to do this, this, and this. But guess what? We're not voting on it during the election cycle. There's a reason why. They are not putting that up there before the election because you know what? It is going to give up our national sovereignty. That is going to cost us jobs. That's going to cost us our way of life. Now, until we protect our economy, you're not going to be able to fight in the global economy. Do we necessarily need to do that? Sure. We have got enough resources in this country to fill a lot of holes in the global economy. So we don't need to actually go out there and compete on different levels. Let's look at our food source. We have probably some of the most arable land in the entire world. There's a reason why the Chinese want to buy that land, to feed their people. Okay? When you see these types of resources in this country, that can turn into jobs really, really quick. The entire food industry, we could probably feed the world. Now, don't give up our sovereignty. Don't make deals and put our workers at a position where they're going to have to compete for those $8 an hour jobs. We can't compete with those jobs or those positions that are overseas because their standard of living is not where ours is. So do we want to compete with those guys? If you give up your sovereignty as part of TPP, you will have to compete with those guys that are over there making $1.50 an hour. And that's just absolutely not fair to the people in this country, and we don't need to do that. Did that answer the question?
Do you have a follow-up, if I may? Do you have how would you counteract something like the trade agreement that's about to be on the table, so to speak? What would you offer instead to allow American businesses, again, to be more competitive globally?
Well, how do businesses compete? Price, quantity, or quality, innovation. Are you offering something new? This country has demonstrated time and time again we're the innovators of the entire world. There are a ton of opportunities out there that you and I can't even see right now. Look at the pharmaceutical industry. Oh my gosh. I mean, it's the number one industry probably in the world when it comes to that type of stuff. But there's a ton of things out there that we're already competitive. We need to maintain that competitive edge. And if you get into an agreement like TPP, you start losing that competitive edge because then you're cutting deals that businesses, they can't compete with. Because the government, you can't compete with a government that's cutting deals. Businesses can't compete, price, quantity, quality. Maybe not quantity, but. So, does that answer the question?
I was wanting you to be more specific, but I'll move on to Mr. McLaughlin at this point. Thank you, sir. Mr. McLaughlin, what changes in trade policy need to occur to allow American businesses to be competitive in a global economy?
Well, the first thing we need to realize is that these trade agreements, they began to be born over several administrations and not just the current Obama administration. And at my last count, we have 4. We got the transatlantic, we got the Pan-American, we got the Pacific, now the North America. But we really got to be careful before we go into these trade agreements, because when we look at the transatlantic one that America had with the European Union, and just a couple weeks ago, England voted to come out of that. We got to wait and see what effects that's going to have on that particular trade agreement. So we cannot be joined at the hip when other countries can make independent decisions that can come back and bite us in the rear. One of the first things we must do is put the wheels back on this broken wagon we call the federal budget. And I have some ideas to do that, and those ideas would put monies back in the taxpayers' pocket, which would allow them to spend more at the cash register, which would spur capitalism within this country, and we wouldn't have to worry about trade agreements. And when I go home to North Carolina, I wouldn't have to look at the Campbell Soup factory closed or the textile plant closed because some child that's 12 years old in an Asian country is getting paid a meager wage under horrible conditions. But we have to be careful when we begin to talk about international trade. And right now, I knew this question was going to come up because this is not my first rodeo. And about 3 o'clock today, I counted 4. 4 trade agreements. And if I counted up the countries that we got agreements with, they came to 30 plus. Something is wrong with that formula. And if I'm elected, I will work to fix it.
Okay, sir, a follow-up question to you, excuse me. You just mentioned you would work to fix it. What specific program, law, act would you seek to bring about?
Okay, well, I build back up on my comment about putting the wheels back on this broken wagon called the federal budget. I would work across the aisle and work with 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue to have a zero-based approach to budgeting. Just because you spent it last year, you don't need to spend it this year. I also would work to put in legislation that other than Social Security, programs for senior citizens, veterans, education, and the military, that all other departments would have to show a 1% decrease in their annual spend for 8 consecutive fiscal years. I also would establish a program whereby each and every country that gets financial aid from America would have to be justified on an annual basis. Because I asked myself the question, if I was paying high credit card debt, would I be borrowing money to give to somebody else? Now, if we take those approaches to lowering the federal budget and not spending, it will allow taxes to be lowered. Those dollars could go back in not to taxpayers' pocket, and it would also give money to put back in infrastructure. That would jumpstart the economy. And if you go back and look at Bill Clinton's early years, that's the fiscal discipline he took. And during his administration, we did not have the fiscal mess at the federal level we have today. That's what I bring to the table. And I know to make it happen, I got to work across the aisle. That's why right now, I've already met all of the opponents in the 3rd congressional race.
Can I follow that up?
No, sir.
Okay.
We've described this as not a debate, if you will.
Sure.
So I'm going, unless our moderator overrules me, I will ask this question, though. You've both mentioned the federal deficits, needing to address that issue. To do that, what 2 areas would you reduce spending in? Because that will have to be part of the formula. Mr. Good?
Okay, I think that the previous question, the way it was phrased, it was like, okay, if we create this program for the government, are we going to be able to fix? What would you do in the government to fix this problem? And I think when you look at problems and you look for the government to fix it, that is a fundamental flaw. The government does not create jobs. And the problem we got is a continued growth of the government. So if we do anything, we have got to cut the size of the government that just continues to grow before we can address any of these problems. And I don't think that we can sit here and say specifically, okay, this is the part of the government that you need to cut. I mean, we all know that 2/3 of the government is, I mean, that money is already committed. So you're really only dealing with 1/3 of the budget when it comes to what money are you going to cut. Now, I will tell you that the problem is we are spending money right now that we don't have. For example, let's say we want to create, and we all saw the vice president stand up and say, you know what, we need to cure cancer. We're going to have a moonshot, okay? Well, we need $3 billion to give it to the National Institute of Health. Well, the National Institute of Health is a bureaucracy. We have the finest pharmaceutical industry in the entire world, and yet we want to go in there and give them government money, they are awash in money, billions of dollars they're making, and we want to go in there as a federal government and say, here's how you need more money, and that's going to fix the problem. That is the kind of spending that we need to cut. The $600 million. We went after, let's say the latest go around with the Zika virus. There are pharmaceutical firms out there that work on this stuff and been working on this stuff, and they started long ago. Throwing more government money at a problem is not the answer. I don't care if it's jobs, I don't care if it's pharmaceuticals, I don't care if it's Zika. There are things that the government can do in providing those essential services, what they need to do, but what they don't need to do is go out there and think that they're going to create jobs and they are going to grow the economy, because that has proven absolutely false. And until we get this insane spending under control, we are going to continue to have these problems.
Thank you, sir. Mr. McLaughlin, what two areas would you look at to reduce spending on the federal level?
Actually, I would look at the several pockets that I put budgets in when I prepare my $33 million annual budget each September. Labor, controllables, overhead, and that hidden thing I call unnecessary spending. In the area of overhead, I would evaluate each department to see where we are spending monies for unnecessary travel, leases that should have expired a long time ago. In the area of labor, how many employees are we carrying that are not meeting performance, and if there are opportunities to reduce labor? I mentioned foreign aid already. We cannot be big brother to every country on this planet. I'm surprised I have not heard the word entitlement, and we forget. And sometimes when we talk about a mother who goes and uses her WIC card to get her baby some milk, we call that entitlement. But we have a farmer out in Idaho who's growing potatoes who might be getting a government subsidy. That's entitlement. If we look at some of the tax breaks that we give to corporations, those are entitlements. I know fiscal year F-13, I won't cite my company, I won't cite the dollar amount, but I know we were incenting our managers on how many employees they could go out and find to qualify for the targeted job tax credit entitlement. So we got to look at the whole spectrum. There are monies to be found. We just got to approach it from a business mentality. And again, I go back to my concept of zero-based budgeting. You only spend it if it needs to be spent, and you don't give it away. But you protect our senior citizens, you protect our veterans, and you make sure we have an educated population. Everything else is on the table.
Thank you, sir. I believe it's now time for our closing statements. The moderator will indicate once you get to the end of your time, Mr. Good. I'll ask you to present your closing statement, sir.
I think that giving the voters a choice is absolutely critical. If the political establishment doesn't give you a choice, there's probably a reason why. The political class, as a component of our establishment, answers to big money. If your congressman takes $177,000 from payday loans, who's he working for? If your congressman takes $800,000 in political action committee money, who's he working for? If your congressman has $2.4 million to go out and buy votes of the constituents, who's he working for? It's time that we stand and fight. It's time that we stand and fight against the political establishment. It's time that we stand and fight against the political class. It's time that we as voters send the message to Washington, D.C. that we are going to hold our representatives accountable. They are no longer operating as if they are the Wizard of Oz behind the Iron Curtain. We see their votes. We see their spending bills. We see the Citigroup amendment that does not go through the appropriations process, but just appears in the Omnibus bill. We see this stuff. So for our representative to look at us and talk to us as if nothing happens, if he can stand on the House floor a week or two after he voted to fund everything he told us he wasn't funded, it's time to stand and fight. I will take that fight to Washington, D.C., just as I've taken that fight against our nation's foes throughout the world. Thank you very much.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Thank you. This is one common point that Mr. Good and I agree, and we haven't talked about this, but excuse me for taking the liberty to say this, is the folk inside I-495 they call the Beltway in Washington may not be happy if I get elected, because my first obligation is to the citizens of the 3rd District of Kansas. And what I hear from the citizens of the 3rd District and what my principles tell me I should vote, that's what Representative McLaughlin will do. And if you, as constituents of the 3rd District, want a representative who has the business savvy to sit down and know that a large percentage of this district is comprised of small business owners, and when they hear about changes in the minimum wage, it causes them to shut up. But at the same time, I know 64% of minimum age earners are women. Something is wrong with that math. And just a 5% increase in minimum wage, or when we raise the minimum wage to 1010, will reduce that number by 5%. If you want a congressman who knows who he is, Clint Eastwood once said in a movie, a man must know his limitations. Nathaniel McLaughlin knows his limitations. That's why congressmen are elected every 2 years. That's the only house that way, because the founding fathers wanted the representative to be closest to the people. It has the youngest qualifying age of 25, because they want this position to be of the people and by the people, and that's what I want to be. So on August the 2nd, if you are a registered Democrat, I ask for you to take your ballot box and vote for Nathaniel McLaughlin to be your next representative. And I took liberty where President Obama said, yes, we can. My little cards say, together we can. I need 40,000 votes to take this primary. It's in Miami County, Johnson County, and Wyandotte County, Northeast Miami County. And if I'm successful in the primary, I need 170,000 votes. My message is moderate. It's not left for left. I was born and spent my first 17 years in North Carolina. I have a spiritual background. Went to BTU Bible study and was a Sunday school teacher. But I know our Constitution separates religion from government. And I know where the two don't mix. But I don't forget about it. Thank you. May God continue to bless this great country, and may God bless you and yours. Good night. August the 2nd. Together we can.
Let's give both these candidates a hand.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.